Chris, thank you so much for being here at the Business of Indie Games. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lovely. I'll dive straight in, if that's all right.
Mhm.
I checked yesterday and enjoyed some of your content. I watched the review of Red Dead Redemption, which I enjoyed. You've got upwards of 300k subscribers as of today, I think, and you started very recently. Please tell us the story of how you started UE Games and how you've managed to build such a well-respected and solid channel.
Originally, it was an entirely different concept for the channel. Back when I first began, it was all about one specific game. It was Tom Clancy's The Division, and it was really just about specific guide material for that one game. I had a lot of friends who played it. I knew a lot of people that were, playing it every single day, and it really turned into just targeted material for a certain type of player in that one game. And that lasted well over a year, I think. And then over time, I started to realize that if I really wanted to keep doing it and I really wanted to transform it and grow beyond that point, that I had to branch out, cover different things, take maybe a news approach, at least talk about a wide spread of games, an eclectic style, collection of games. And then I started to do so, I guess, about 1 year ago, a little bit less than 1 year ago. And it was a tough transition. But once I've done that, now that I consider myself to have succeeded in that endeavor now. It's very, very appealing to be able to cover anything that I want at any point and know reasonably well that the audience will be receptive of it because they have just as a diverse palette for video games as I do, instead of being locked into one title. So the beginning process was really establishing in one specific video game and then going through some growing pains, but branching out to general coverage sometime later.
Yeah, thank you. What is it you think that people love about your channel then? I'm sorry, that question
Um,
isn't on my list. I'm just
oh, don't
interested.
worry. It's I don't know. I feel like that changes almost on a weekly basis. Sometimes when I get really passionate about a project or a topic, I'll do really thorough research. Other times, if I get really into it, I'll take a lot of extra time to eloquently phrase what I'm thinking. So the articulation might be a draw. And then other times it's purely the subject matter. They really care about this game. I just happen to be covering the topics that they care about with that game. So they'll, identify with the content there. But it is something that changes a lot. In the past, it was purely for information. Now, I would say it's probably for a lot of pro-consumer stuff. A lot of people that feel wronged by the game industry on a AAA level, they pay $60 for a game and it's not what they expected, or it's half complete. They're really looking to identify with someone that shares those concerns. So that's probably going to be a big draw. But yeah, it is really flexible. It's not one individual thing. It changes a lot.
Yeah, thank you. I certainly noticed how well you communicate, when I was watching some of your reviews, certainly, it was a game I hadn't played. So you certainly gave me a lot of insight into the quality of that experience. Um, what have been some of your milestones in your subscriber growth? When did you see, some big spikes in the usership?
Um, Right initially, as I settled on a concept for the original Division game called build videos, which I'm not sure how many people were really producing them, continuously like I was when I actually got into that. That was a pretty big bump, just consistent growth because I had one every day for quite a long period of time. But then the largest by far was Red Dead Redemption 2. So it's funny that you mentioned you were watching the review for that. When that game came out, I still did kind of a hybrid style of content. I would do tips videos and I would do news coverage. And Red Dead Redemption 2 had an abundance of both, the possibility for both there. There was news for it. There was, of course, the online mode, which, had some controversies. And then there was also the fact that it was a very large game with a huge scope that a lot of people, needed information on. So I was able to do both of those types of content. And that combined really, really gave the channel its biggest growth spike. And that was the catalyst that catapulted me into being able to cover any game that I wanted effectively and with stability.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. What a great kickstart, as it were.
Hmm.
Um, and so, what do you do now? You mentioned, the very eloquent explanations and covering stuff that gamers are interested in that otherwise wouldn't get covered. What else do you do to continue growing your channel?
Um, I think probably the largest thing is search for topics that I believe to be interesting, which is hit or miss. Sometimes I'll pick a topic and nobody's really interested. There was a great example of that. There was a leak for a live service Suicide Squad game based on the superheroes, and I covered it. I thought it was really interesting. I thought this was going to be a great video, so I covered it. It seemed to be from a credible source and everything. It was fun to talk about, and it was one of the worst performing videos on the channel in the past at least year. And I didn't really understand it. So it's hit or miss. Sometimes I'll pick a topic, I think it's really good, and it does really, really poorly. But most of the time, if I can, find something that I know has interest and I know that a lot of people want to see, then that will be something that contributes well to the growth of the channel. And then, of course, I always try to look for things that I'm also personally invested in. That makes it a lot easier and more fun and consistent to research, and it just adds to the value of the process. But a big part of it is looking for something that I know will be popular to an audience.
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting, of course. And I suppose did you work out what it was with the Suicide Squad video? Is it just that brand is not, I mean, it's a pretty popular brand, right?
Yeah, I had a couple theories. I, of course, could never get anything concrete. My first theory was that it was a live service game and it was also a leak. So I don't traditionally cover leaked material all that often. So that might not be something super interesting. And then the second thing, which is a little bit more tinfoil hatty, and I couldn't prove this ever, but is that there was some wording in the descriptive tags and then also the title for Suicide Squad that YouTube's algorithm was not happy about promoting or pushing. So that contributed to the video being slightly, I don't want to say suppressed because I don't view it to be a malicious thing that they're doing on purpose, but kind of it interfered with their protections of brand safety and advertiser integrity and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a touchy word, isn't it, in any
Mhm.
circumstance? So, yeah, yeah. Maybe it's not as tinfoil as you might think, that one. Um, is there anything else you do to grow your channel?
Um, I do look for collaborations sometimes. It's not something that I go out of my way all the time to do because it takes some time and it's hit or miss to be sure. But collaborations and shout outs and crossovers and interviews and anything really where I can get my name out there and work with other people and socialize in the industry, that's always productive to do. But outside of that, regular content, it's really the same old stuff that any YouTuber would be doing, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, our audience is going to love this collaboration. Appreciate you doing the video today, the interview. Um, can you tell us a little bit about the indie spotlight and why you feel this is important as an influencer?
Yeah, so the indie spotlight was something I actually talked about for a long time with family, actually with my sister, a hefty amount before ever doing. So I've railed against certain practices in the AAA space. That's part of the identity of the brand. But while doing that, I started to feel a sense of not hypocrisy, but an obligation to actually do something to remedy or to combat the things that I'm fighting against instead of just screaming into the void. And fortunately, there are a lot of ways to actually do that. So every time, for every AAA game that comes out that doesn't deliver on expectations or goes down like the Hindenburg, there's 100 other indie titles that have passionate developers, much smaller budgets, but really creative ideas, and I play a hefty sum of them. And of course, beyond that, there's a lot of people that tell me about them, and I don't have time to play every single suggestion, but I try to. Where there's excellent material there. So the idea was that if I'm going to condemn a certain practice, I should propose alternatives that are deserving, worthy, artistic, beautiful, all of the above. And that's where the indie spotlight came from. And the idea was to pick an indie game whenever I could, one that really inspired me, one that had some kind of truly I'm blanking on the word here, but something that really made me feel something that deserved to be highlighted, and then do a dedicated video just about that, really expressing that how impressed I am.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great. And indies, really appreciate being covered by influencers. I know that for sure from other interviews that I've done, because very often they don't have the budget to effectively pay the influencer to pay their game, play their game. You know, I mean, I know we're going to talk a little bit about that later on, but just thinking, do you, when you do these comparisons, do you do direct comparisons? Like if you've got something in a AAA, in a big genre, you know, say World War II, do you then cover an indie title that could be sort of like an alternative purchase, or do you just look at indie games that you like?
I That's actually a good idea, and I probably could do something like that. Propose direct alternatives to certain titles that I dislike in the AAA space. But no, I mostly focus on something that stands out to me head and shoulders as just a truly artistic work. And I wait for those to come along so I can be truly passionate about it. When I do cover individual indie games, I'll often compare them to AAAs, but not for any other reason than to just highlight their strengths. That's really what that video series is about. A good example would be Shadow of the Colossus being the AAA version, and then Pray for the Gods being the indie version, which is something that was heavily inspired by Shadow of the Colossus, built by three people. It's just an excellent, beautiful title. And it's so much more impressive when you view it through the lens of three people having created it. So I did, of course, talk about Shadow of the Colossus, but it wasn't really a direct comparison, as in it's a substitute. It was more of like an expansion on what you enjoy, focusing on the good rather than the bad. But that is an interesting way to go about it. If there was something that I really disliked that came out and thought was a disappointment, I could look for indie titles that help substitute and you know, fill that niche or that craving.
Yeah, it may be half the price as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, I just lost my point there. You picked up on something interesting there. Yeah, so when you're working with, when you were playing Shadow of Colossus and then the indie Pray to the Gods,
Mhm.
which did you prefer?
What should I prefer? Um, I I would say it's either for different reasons. Shadow of the Colossus for production value, in all honesty, just because of the budget and the amount of time, and it's clearly a larger project. But Pray for the Gods because of the inspirational aspect. Knowing the three people made that is something entirely different. It changes the way you play it, at least from my perspective. Because when I was playing that game, I thought it was obviously, to me, obviously, because I was wrong about it, a team of a dozen or so people. Now, I have obviously not the best, you know, impression or in-depth knowledge of the indie space, knowing team sizes, etc. But it was such a good quality piece of production that made me think that many more people had worked on it, that it lent itself so well to it's a grand game on a grand scale with these large colossus, and it impressed me in a grand way, the fact that they've been able to achieve it. So for different reasons, both are stand out in my mind.
Yeah, well, I mean, just three people. I mean, that's more power to their elbow, you know.
Mhm.
Um, you're very vocal about the failures of big budget games for predatory monetization, false advertising. What's some of the pushback that you get from that?
Well, in the beginning, the most vocal pushback that I got was against me as a person being perceived as too negative. That's by far the most vocal pushback. Because originally, when I did purely informational content, and then I transitioned to being, you know, largely critical of the industry, there were a lot of people that, you know, weren't there for that. So they were like, "Oh, this, you know, yet another video criticizing something that's too negative. I don't want to be around this." So that was by far the most vocal stuff. But outside of that, I think each individual game amasses a following of very dedicated fans, and they can sometimes be not very receptive of criticism, regardless of whether that criticism is valid or invalid or well researched or articulate. It doesn't matter to them. They are a fan of that title, and they're going to continue to be a fan of that title. So once in a while, when I criticize a game for any given reason, maybe I think it's very well justified, they will they will push back and be at odds with the coverage, or very, you know, distasteful of my position.
Yeah, great. And they don't get too personal to you, though, do they?
There's been some personal stuff over the years. That's one of the reasons why I always take the position that on social media I see a lot of people resorting to the, well, I received threats or harassment as a kind of I'm not sure what it really is. It feels like a way to bolster their position. I try to never do that because it's the internet. And when you say one thing on the internet, you can think that you're going to make everyone happy, and you can make no one happy. There will always be someone upset with you for having an opinion on the internet. And my entire job is opinions. So I've definitely received some personal stuff, some general stuff, some inaccurate stuff, some correct stuff, all with the intention of tearing me down or insulting me. But I try not to really focus on it or let it bother me, because it will always exist.
Yeah, it sounds like you need quite a thick skin to be an influencer, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you don't have a thick skin, that's when they start to chip away at you. And if they chip away at you, that means that's, incremental damage that is very hard to recover from. And then if you start letting that happen, it's a downward slide till you're not able to cover things in the same way, and then you let them really influence what you're saying, and it doesn't work like that. It's something that I try to avoid at all costs.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, that's the whole point of it, is to keep your unique opinion. I, I imagine that's what makes people interested in the first place, right?
Yeah, I like to think so.
Mm.
Having a strong opinion, even when someone disagrees, they'll often respect you for it. I've heard if you can communicate it to them clearly, they may say, "Oh, well, I don't fully agree with you there. I think something else, but I see where you're coming from," right? And then that builds a kind of a sense of trust that you'll always back it up in a way that they can at least understand. And then even if they disagree, they still probably got some value out of it. That's some of the feedback that I've been recently getting on certain videos, which felt pretty good.
Well, it certainly makes for a more interesting life if we all respect each other, makes
Mm.
it easier to explore new ideas. Um, Chris did a great video on the travesty of mobile advertising. Can you tell us a little bit about how some of the influencer partnerships work?
Yeah, that's one where I definitely burned some bridges with my mobile. Uh, I don't want to call it an exposure video because that's not what it was. With my honesty and transparency on how the mobile sponsorship process works. So what I typically run into is an email or a Twitter message, from someone that would like to open a partnership. And then from there, if it goes anywhere, they'll forward me a script more often than not. And then the standard for those scripts, at least that I've seen, I know some other, creators in different genres and different subsets have entirely different partnerships. So this is just speaking about mobile advertising in particular, which is one that I get a lot of requests for. Those scripts are insanely detailed. They'll tell you to smile at a certain time. They'll tell you to say X, Y, and Z exactly as it's written. You'll need to, frame it in a way where you're trying to get people to buy their microtransactions or to pay for the pass or the whatever, the fancy, armor set. And the way it's constructed, it feels more like they want a puppet and they want to just move your mouth for you, which is something I could never abide by. That's a personality, a strength or a defect, call it what you will. It's something I really could never, ever stand. So after I really started to get more of those, which is a direct function of growth, the larger your channel, the more people reach out to you. That's when I started to be kind of more abrasive about my wording, and just really stopped caring about trying to maintain those bridges because I never wanted to accept a sponsorship like that. Anyways, I really like mutually beneficial partnerships with a brand that I think is reputable, but I would never want to have like a mobile game that was clearly built only for the sake of profit and then say exactly what they told me to say. None of that. So I started to be more abrasive with it, and I definitely burned some bridges or got put on a list somewhere because there was a sharp decline in the number of scripts like that I would get, after I made a video directly showing one on screen and talking about, this is exactly what they want you to do and how I would never do that and how I don't want to do that because I feel like it would be a betrayal of the audience's trust.
Well, you know what? I'm very respectful of that, actually, because that's it's incredibly manipulative, isn't it? To tell you when to smile and how to frame things so that microtransactions are purchased.
Yeah,
Um,
and on top of that, they'll actually they'll send you gameplay and then tell you to pretend that you're playing it. So you'll put it on the screen and they'll say that's the gameplay as if you are playing it. So react to things like you just did it, but it's all pre-recorded. And that's kind of
well,
a breach in honesty that I I couldn't really maintain her stomach.
Well, it's like bribery almost, isn't it?
Yeah, and you're required to disclose sponsorships as per regulation. And I never ran into someone specifically asking me not to do it, but I know that that exists. I've seen it elsewhere in the industry. So that was always something that made me feel uncomfortable as well. Having to tell people that I was directly paid to do this, knowing full well that I was showing gameplay on the screen and saying I was playing it, that I wasn't playing, all that combined is something that just wasn't going to work.
Yeah. I've got a question here. It says you don't do paid shout outs on your channel. Why is that? But I think really you just answered that question, right?
Yeah, partially. By shout out, I have a very specific definition of what that means in my head as a
Oh yeah,
creator.
of course. Yeah,
Like,
as opposed to sponsorship. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Sorry about
it
that.
means like go over and subscribe to that person. I do shout
Yeah,
outs, just not paid ones because it just feels wrong if it were to be paid. It's hard to really put my finger on. Um, Morally speaking or ethically speaking, I guess I could justify it if I wanted to, but it's not a hoop I want to try to jump through. It's just easier not to.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that enhances your reputation in the long run as well, right?
I hope so. A
Because
lot of
you're
what
shouting
I've
out to
encountered,
people you believe in, right?
yeah, a lot of what I've encountered recently is that some comments and some viewers have started to tell me that I'm a trusted voice, which I now it's my obligation to be worthy of that. Right, as soon as people
Yeah,
trust you to speak for them in any capacity, whether it's a hobby or something more impactful, it doesn't matter. In any capacity whatsoever, you have to do justice to that. So I will do my best to continue to do that. Ups and downs along the way, but since people are happy, at least some people are happy with what I've been saying on their behalf, I will absolutely try to expand on that and deserve it.
yeah, great. And there's a lot of integrity there. I certainly believe in that. Um, so just looking at Indie Spotlight, you run a regular Indie Spotlight. Why is it that you're not contacted by more developers and PR companies?
Um, there's always a really large burst after I upload an Indie Spotlight video, and I actually haven't uploaded one as recently as I would like. I'm searching for another one to do. Every time I put one up, there's a big influx of prospective games or of contacts from developers or not necessarily PR firms. Again, I do think it's a little conspiracy theorist, but I think I got on a list somewhere for PR firms as not brand safe, or I'm not really sure. Um, but yeah, there's an influx after an upload, and then I try to download as many as I can, buy as many as I can, play as many as I can, and then work towards the next one. But it really calms down after that. When you upload a video, there's a huge influx of traffic and viewership. I'm sure a lot of people know this already. Right when it goes up for the first like 24 hours, and then it dies down. So it's the same way with the indie spotlights. So there's kind of a growth in the series immediately, and then it peters out, and then eventually, when I do another one, it spikes again.
Thank you. So just jumping back, onto the sort of the channel influencer behavior stuff. What do you think influencers and content creators can do to maintain more integrity in the management of their channels?
Um, I guess a lot of that would depend on the person and what their personal values are. For someone that believes in consumer health and vocal anti-predatory monetization or corporate behavior, uh, I guess a lot of it would revolve around listening to their audience's needs, wants, and desires. Um, it's a tricky thing because there. That's a really good question. That's a very, very good question. I don't want to,
Thanks.
suppose that my motivations should be everyone's motivations, but when looking out for the interests of consumers, a lot of it has to do with critically evaluating content and not succumbing to the forced marketing material. And this may come across as like I'm telling everybody to have a glass half empty kind of mentality, which is not exactly what I'm trying to do. But conventions like E3, I've seen so many of my peers and my friends and people that I greatly respect sucked up in the whirlwind of industrial hype, knowing full well, and they're intelligent people, and I know that they know this, that a lot of what they're seeing probably isn't real, and then it ends up not being real. and then but they enjoyed the hype so much. And sometimes the thing that you can do to best enhance your coverage for the sake of everyone else is to objectify everything, to step away from your own personal desires in the space and the things that you really want to happen in the space, which can be incredibly difficult, and I fail at it often. And then evaluate things from a neutral perspective whenever possible, and think about the end result for the user in 6 months or whatever after everything has come to fruition. It's a complicated thing, and I'll definitely think about that more in the future. That's a really good question.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it sounds like you've got quite a balanced view already. Um, I mean, this is the $1 million question, I think, for indies. This next one. What advice do you have for indies in right now in terms of getting their games seen on YouTube?
Well, is this just about getting increased exposure, like getting more eyes on their project, or is it about like building up a reputable brand and really, cultivating a good reputation?
I mean, that if you could answer both, that would be great, because you
Okay.
covered two important areas there.
Well, the biggest one that I would say for increasing exposure on YouTube is giving creators freedom. So I ran into a crappy situation recently where I streamed Borderlands 3, but then one of the songs in Borderlands 3 for like a 6.5 hour live stream was copyright claimed by a music studio that I have no idea who they are. So the entire 6.5 hour broadcast was taken down, and I couldn't earn any money from it because it was claimed by someone I don't know for like a minute and a half of music. So the more freedom and the more, loose infrastructure you can give to creators to create their own material for themselves, for their own purposes, that also benefits you by getting eyes on your project, the better it will be. So having, a lot of freedom and not claiming stuff and being open about that, it'll entice a lot of people to cover your game because they know that they can benefit, you will also benefit, and then it builds up a really good reputation. And then more towards the reputation side of things specifically, I would say the largest thing is communicating as early as possible when you have 100% certainty. A lot of the complaints that I personally have and that I see in my own audience and I get feedback for in the AAA space and on larger projects is that they'll give information, they'll say one thing, and then it will be another. And at one point, even on Anthem's development, during that development cycle, they said that lying is the cost of transparency, which is something I could never agree with. Lying is the cost of transparency because they'll tell you one thing and then things have to change during the development cycle. So it just ends up in there being certain things that were inaccurate. And then you have games like Fallout 76, where Bethesda and Pete Hines specifically said they would never have microtransactions. And he said this numerous times, that augmented gameplay. It would always be cosmetic only. And now, of course, that's been thrown out the window. There's a bunch of different things that augment gameplay. So communicating as early as you can with 100% certainty and not going back on it is the key. Now, finding that balance of when to do it, because you can't communicate a 50-50 and say it's 100% going to be this option, because then you really don't know. But as soon as you know for a fact it will be this way, be as open as you can and communicate it to as many people as you can, forum posts, blog posts, live streams, developer streams, anything that you can, if you have the time for it, obviously. That will cultivate a really good reputation among the supporters that you have. And then on top of that, being very friendly to creators and opening up the resources, maybe creating a press kit and sending it to as many people as you can with some attached artwork and some, logos, etc., so they can put it in their thumbnails. If you're really open with them and give them, the options, then they will use those options, and then those options benefit you. And then the transparency along the way just helps everyone have a better experience, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And what about the games themselves? They need to be in, the most 100% playable form. They need to give you the best bits to play that are enjoyable, so it's a worthwhile experience to review.
That's a tricky one because I'm a very strong advocate for artistic freedom and expression. If I can personally not enjoy a game, but still respect that game was created from an artistic standpoint from someone's vision, and that it is still admirable, even if I didn't enjoy playing it. So it's a very tricky one there. Of course, if a game is barely functional or dysfunctional entirely, that'll be hard. That's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people, especially reviewers. But when it comes down to subjective interpretation, I think that developers should have every incentive and every support when it comes to following what they believe in and what they really envision themselves. For instance, I don't know how Death Stranding is going to be. It might be a terrible game, but it looks to be an artistic work that was born of creative vision. Someone was inspired, truly inspired. And yeah, so even if I end up hating it and I think the gameplay's stale or some other thing, I'll still respect the way that they were able to build atmosphere and the vision behind it. I suspect most likely. So yeah, separating out, subjective interpretation of gameplay mechanics and then the actual value of the vision itself is important for reviewers to do. And if they're not going to do that, then that really isn't the fault of the developer. If they're going to play it and say, "Oh, I just got a bug that made me lose 20 minutes of progress," it's a 1 out of 10, then you can't stop them from doing that. And I don't think they should be doing that. But yeah, it's really having a somewhat polished experience is, in my eyes, a little bit secondary to having a good core concept and a good vision.
Well, thank you. I think that's a very balanced view and much appreciated, from the developer side, when the reviewer has a balanced view. Um, can indies contact you to get their games seen, or at least try to get their games seen?
Absolutely. I can't guarantee that I'll play everything or do a spotlight for everything, but upper echelon gamers at yahoo.com, I'm able to see pretty much everything that's sent. And then if I do decide to cover a game, you don't need to send me a key, because one of my stances is that an indie game deserves to have the support, and it really benefits more from the support if you support a AAA game with a contracted studio. They don't see any of the sales numbers there, right? They have their salary and they have their massive team, and they have all of their payment and their everything set up for them before the game even comes out. For an indie developer, oftentimes the sales matter a lot, and they allow them to continue working on a game and really bring it up to a standard that they wanted and fulfill their vision. So I always buy the indie games that I cover. So there's no need to send me a key or anything like that. But if you have a briefing on a project or something, I would love to take a look. And upper echelon gamers at yahoo.com. I'll try to always, go through.
Thank you. Great. And we'll put that in the that contact address in our description as well. I'd like to bring up a sensitive topic. You're quite outspoken about some potentially explosive issues. How do you find the social divide going on right now in gaming, and how do you manage it on your channel? It's very easy to say the wrong thing right now. I guess controversy can be a good thing, though, for the channel growth too.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah, that is an interesting subject. I've definitely touched on topics that could be regarded as incendiary or explosive, but I've always felt like there's an intrinsic sense of armor, right? There's an intrinsic protection to being articulate about the fact that it is an incendiary topic. As soon as you acknowledge that something is controversial and you do your honest best to maintain a level perspective on it, even if I were to say something that were to be perceived wrong, or somehow spark a sense of outrage, people could always fall back on the fact that I have tried now for a number of months, even years, to tackle things with a level perspective and to really see both sides, or to just be reasonable. Being reasonable is something I try to always do, because in the face of recent situations, especially where there was a very tragic circumstance with an accusation and then a subsequent man's life coming to a close, all based around something that was not through proper channels, really just put out there on social media, and then an indie developer, it all went south. And I won't go into much detail further than that. I don't know if that's good or bad for the sake of this interview, but it's not a subject I really want to focus on. But that kind of atmosphere, witch hunting, outrage, driven by the controversy of canceling someone or attacking someone, I'd never want to perpetuate that, and I never want to really contribute to that. So even when I touch on incendiary issues, it's really from the perspective of giving my own balanced ideas, I hope, and not really, contributing to the let's make this a huge deal, let's go out of our way to attack, or something like that. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. It's a really complicated subject, and I go back and forth on how to cover a lot of these issues at times, and I skip a lot of these issues in the coverage. Sometimes something will happen in the space that is quite controversial, from a social standpoint, and I'll make the choice to skip over it, even though I know it would probably be a very popular topic. I just won't cover it because I choose to focus more on the games. Um, but yeah, I think we're in a very hectic era of social media confusion, and there's always going to be something happening, and it's going to be hard to interpret, and there's going to be a lot of people mad about it. So I try to not have the mad people mad at me.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I mean, it's incumbent on us all to avoid bullying, I think, in a social media space. What do you have planned for moving forward with your channel?
In terms of short-term stuff, we're in release season right now, so I'm going to focus on reviewing as many games as I can. The Surge 2 is next on the agenda. And long term, I really don't know. We've talked internally, with some of the team members about publishing, about doing some indie publishing, or managing PR or something like that. But it would be delicate how it would need to be handled, considering the fact that there is a YouTube channel that I would be running, and then also perhaps working with other games and disclosure of things, etc. But I'm very open to possibilities at this point. One of the original ideas was to have our own platform for matchmaking, like social matchmaking in games, specific games like Destiny or The Division or whatever else. And I would love to return to that and really build out kind of a social gamers platform, with a lot of different benefits and options, and almost like a social media aspect, but really just about video games. But it's all really loose concepts at this point. So long-term plans is up in the air, and I'm excited for it. I'm really anticipating the future greatly, but no concrete stuff.
Right, great. I mean, that's a really interesting idea that you've come up with there. Wow, I don't think any influencers so far are publishing their own games, are they? Always, well, yeah. PewDiePie has some of his own games out and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, there's a few. I know Carnage had a top-down ARPG that he was working on a long time ago. I don't know what happened with it, but I know that certain streamers and YouTubers and stuff have made a slight pivot and produced something themselves, like of course with the help of contractors and et cetera, and a team. Um, but I really don't know that many that turn towards publishing in a serious way, and it's something that I would love to do, because another part of it is I spend so much time talking about publisher behavior in the space. So if I can really stand by that and then assert my own core values as a publisher, as small, it would be on the tiniest of scales. But if I could do that, then that would be there. I would take a tremendous amount of pride in that, being able to really, do what I am preaching, to exemplify the things that I'm saying others should exemplify, in the space. Yeah, it
Yeah,
feels good. It's something I would like to do.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there are some good guys that publish and fund games as well as the huge corporate machines,
Hmm.
and so they're always welcome with in the game in the indie space, and also you'll have an insight through the way that you play games, and you'll also get to see some content that maybe hasn't reached the publishers yet.
Hmm.
Really good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And for the Indie Spotlight show, what makes you want to review a game on it?
Um, it, a lot of it is just my own personal enjoyment. When I sit down and play a game, yeah, I'll there's that spark, right? I'm sure everyone has had that. They start playing something and they just know this is a game I love. I've had it numerous times throughout the years. If I have that spark, I know I'm like, I just have to cover this. I have to cover this. I love it. I love it. It's fantastic. And I really look for that because that's such a wonderful moment too. Just knowing that and being excited, right? So a lot of times I play a game to cover it, just to cover it or review it from a AAA perspective, right? I'm like, all right, I'm about to play the Surge 2. I don't know if I'm going to love that game. I don't know if I'm going to think it's great. Who knows? But when you really click with a game and you have that spark and like I can't wait to wake up tomorrow because I want to play this. That feeling, there's nothing else like it. And I get that feeling with a lot of indie games. And I thought I should absolutely be covering this, right? I don't want to just do this in my own time because, over the years I built up a platform where I could tell other people about this game and maybe they would have the same identification with it. Maybe they would wake up and think, wow, I can't wait to play that too. So it's something I would love to spread awareness for when I really get that click and love a game.
Thank you. That's really clear. Can I ask you if you could do anything differently if you had your time again? Would there be anything?
Oh gosh, there would probably be a lot of small things that I would do along the way. With pre-existing knowledge, I would, radically change my approach to my initial coverage. I would have like different series options that I would expand outward on. I wouldn't really have focused on just one game. So from an analytical perspective, yeah, there's a lot of things that I would do differently. But talking about like one key moment or very important little exact developments. Yeah, there was a situation with some moderation staff that popped up. I guess like almost 2 years ago now, and I would have done it differently. It was back when I was a little bit younger. I was more focusing on Twitch and streaming there, and I had a different approach, and I hadn't really cultivated the kind of I guess attitude of pro consumer, anti corporate behavior, trying to have as much integrity as possible. I hadn't done that yet, so I was more focused on just play games, have fun, make a living off of it, and yeah, it wasn't the best situation. There was some moderation staff and we had a disagreement and it ended up with them parting ways, and we haven't talked since, and I would do that differently. I like to maintain positive relationships because I'm learning increasingly over the past months that it's a small world. A lot of the people in the space, they all talk to each other, and it's good to even if we disagree, and I disagree with a lot of people on a lot of things, that goes without saying. It's good to have positive relationships. So I would go back and do it differently so that everything was more amicable there.
Yeah, great. And it's a really good point. I mean, looking at it at the other end, from my perspective, 20 years later, there are people that I knew who were like a production assistant or a tester who are now running publishers,
Mm,
So
definitely. Yeah. It's
a small
crazy.
world.
Yeah. I went out to Malmo, Sweden to work on the original division for an elite task force project where they brought in some community members to like give feedback. And some of the people I met there and then some of the people I met in other places all knew each other. Which, I met other developers at E3 2 years later, and they knew some of the people that worked at Massive. And it's just, there's a lot of connections there that you don't see. So I'm learning over time, and I'll continue to learn each and every day that there's a large amount of importance on relationships within the industry. And from an outside perspective, you may think, and I definitely did think, oh, it's such a big industry that nobody ever knows anybody, and it doesn't matter, and you can say whatever you want, and it's fine. And I'll still say whatever I want when it comes down to maintaining the integrity of the brand. But I think it is, especially in direct messages and email chains and everything else, I've learned the importance of maintaining good relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And one final question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any maybe sort of 3 rules or some tips for advice for indies at the moment with regard to getting on YouTube and working with influencers?
Um, never claim content that is made with the intention of fair use, even if technically it doesn't uphold the 4 pillars of fair use and there is grounds for it. It's just, it doesn't go well in the creator ecosystem to claim content. um so yeah, respect the people that are covering your content, even if it's critical. And there is, of course, there's a line there. If someone's just bashing you, then it's very hard to take that sometimes. But the best attitude is to always be hands off in terms of claiming content or doing stuff like that, because it's just something that is appreciated in the creator ecosystem. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is transparency. Transparency as early as possible with 100% certainty. That will help cultivate a lot of people that are interested. And tip three is that if you pursue sponsorships, um, do it in an open-ended way. At least for me, if I were to get an email from an indie developer that said, "Hey, we would like to pursue a sponsorship with you, and we have something creative, right? Like, we would love to get your community interested in the game, so we're going to put a banner in with your logo at this location or whatever, and then anybody that uses your code from your community can have like a discount or maybe a small piece of unique content that they will have on their account." Like, I know it's a lot of development time, and maybe it wouldn't work for a lot of games or situations. But if you can attach some kind of incentive, a unique type of incentive, and avoid "this is the script, this is what we want you to say, please cover our game and we'll pay you," if you can avoid that kind of stuff, then I am infinitely more receptive of it. And I know that a lot of other channels that I talk to would be as well. So finding a creative way to interact with a YouTuber or a streamer is very much appreciated.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's a real gem, actually, there, what you've just said. Makes perfect sense. And often it's actually quite easy in development to add a small piece of content or an icon or a badge or
Mhm.
something unique, in addition to the discount or instead of a discount. So I think our audience will really appreciate that. I think that really good, mutually beneficial relationships can be built that way.
I'm glad. Yeah, it's if I were to receive an email and someone said, "Hey, we're going to put a banner that says Upper Echelon Gamers," and that's like that happened. Our name is on a police car in the Division 2, and it's not a game that I play all the time. It diverged from a lot of what I expected from the original game. But I will never ever stop appreciating and loving the fact that they have Upper Echelon Gamers on a car in the game. It's just it's a crazy feeling. So little things like that, and finding unique ways to approach is, yeah, it would be amazing. I would love to get more emails like that. That would be fantastic.
Great, thank you. Well, perhaps I can send you one with my next game.
I would be, I would love that. That would be fantastic.
Wonderful, thank you. I really appreciate your time today. And it just remains for me to say to our community, please subscribe to Chris's channel, Upper Echelon Gamers, on YouTube. I've certainly watched it myself and it's fabulous. Thank you so much for your time today, Chris. I really appreciate it.